this will all be edited anyway, but we can start wherever you like. You want to go with let's start with the arms, okay?
Anytime.
Oh, forget the camera.
Seeing if he was ready.
It's not there.
Yeah.
It's not there.
That's all right.
But you were asking me to describe the arms, and this was another thing that the lieutenant brought out, that it was very the difference between theirs and ours, from the wrist to the first joint here, that it was probably 1.5 times longer than the top part up here. It was very odd looking. It was very odd, she said. And the very small arms, very small.
Bone structure?
Bone structure, of course I asked her about the bones because we were talking about the wrist bones and everything, and she said it was very similar to ours, but the bones were so small that their bones probably wasn't in the arms wasn't any larger than my finger.
Wow.
So.
Okay, now give me 2 or 3 sentences on how they were dressed.
We never mentioned it.
Right?
Never talked about the dress.
Did she say anything about sex, or was she able to determine?
She said she really never, she was so sick and everything that never even entered her mind. So that was it.
I guess not.
No way to determine the sex of the beings then.
Well, it wasn't discussed with her. It probably was, but she, like she said, I was so ill and so horrified that I don't, she said, she sat up all night, and she knew I was going to be real concerned, knew I was going to be on what happened, she knew that I got in trouble, probably. And she drew that, she sat up and made little notes on the back of these little prescription pads. And that's what, she had her notes made out, and that's what we discussed, particularly what she had.
I was very interested in that you had kept so many records of the incident and pertaining to everything that you knew regarding the UFO crash. And you kept them in the, there at Ballard's, and then later they disappeared. Yeah. Could you give us a
Well, I was really in charge of all the military contracts. I did all the bids and everything and really took care of all the contracts myself. And that was one of my duties at the funeral home, to take care of the military. And I had a file on everything that ever happened at Walker Air Base, like Bob Hope and some of the big orchestras, and everybody'd come and have the big parties and everything in the hangars, I attended, but I would also have pictures and everything. I had a personal file that I kept, and I kept everything in this file that pertained that I attended or whatever. And this is where I put the diagrams and the notes that she gave me was in my personal file. Well, then the Ballard Funeral Home sold at a later date, several years later, that it sold. And the people that bought the funeral home, these were files they were the old files that they kept in the basement down in the furnace room. And they had all I had all the military files together in one filing cabinet. Everything had happened at the base and everything. We also had the contract at Fort Sumner Air Base. They had a glider base there, and also fighter pilot training there, and the P-47s and 51s and so on. And so I had all the files. Everything was, one filing cabinet was strictly all military. And that's where I had all this filed away. I had all this filed away. I even had the newspaper that Walt Haut, the headlines and all this, the next day. I had all that in his files.
What interests me is that out of all these files, all these different topics, only one was missing when you went to look for it, and that was one pertaining to this.
Yeah.
Can you review that for us?
Well, no, there were some of the other files were missing also, not just my own file, but my file was in the same, all of my file was gone. But there was also some files, they had actually had destroyed most of the files that were pertaining after certain years. They just gotten rid of them. And they told the manager of the funeral home, that's the manager there named Raymond Otero, also told me that he knew my file was there. Joe Lucas, that was manager at that time knew my files were there. And he and I'd had some personal problems, and he said, get rid of his damn files. We don't want anything that remind us of him. And that's where the files went, really.
There was some discussion about how to preserve the bodies,
Right.
dry ice and that sort of thing, and you kind of addressed
Oh, well,
where they got the ice and things.
Okay, then the mortuary officer, what would you do if you had to ship one out? And but you couldn't do anything to it. I mean, that you couldn't, do any treatments or anything. What would you do? I said the only thing you could do that I would suggest, that first thing, if you have a problem, don't want to destroy any of the tissue, any blood cells, anything that you don't want to destroy, I would suggest that you contact a pathologist. And I said, I'm sure the Army Airfield, somebody's got some pathologists around. I didn't know that they had one in Roswell, but I said, if I were you, I'd call a pathologist and ask him how he would like to have it done, or whatever you're going to do, or whatever it is. You better do what the pathologist, because he's the one that's going to do the autopsy and make the reports. But I said, the only thing I know you could do is just go to Clardy's Dairy or Sunset Creamery, we had 2 at the time, and buy all the dry ice you can and pack them in dry ice, if that's possible. And that's what I suggest that they do.
Excuse me, Glenn, you're hitting my mic with your
Oh,
thumb.
sorry about that.
It's all right. I've done it at least 8 times
I
already
know it's
this
not
week.
personal, I guess.
No.
Okay, what do you think?
I think, as a suggestion, you might want to do that part again if you think you'd like to use it, because
The dry ice?
you probably hit it just a few times. And it might
Oh, sorry about that.
Isn't this picky business?
Glenn Dennis, take 2, Clarity
Yeah.
Dairy.
All right, let's go back and go over the dry ice then again.
Well, okay. What I suggested to the mortuary officer, I suggested this to the mortuary officer and we discussed this probably for 20 minutes or better on the telephone. And I kept telling him, hey, if you have a problem, if you got something out there, if you need our services, we have the contract, I would be glad to come out and help you take care of it. And he said, no, this is for future. Kept always referring this was for future use in case we did have something. But then I said, well, first thing you better do, you better get a hold of a pathologist. I don't know whether you have one at the base, but I know you probably have the top pathologist, something similar to those words. And I said, that's what I do, and you better let him give you the instructions, and then you better do what he tells you to do, because he's the one that's going to do the autopsy. And if it's this sensitive, you better do what he tells you. But I said, the only other suggestion I can make, that you go to Clardy's Dairy or you go to Sunset Creamery, buy all the dry ice you can and pack whatever you have, whatever the problem is, you better pack it in dry ice and then do whatever you have to do with it, because that's the only way. They tried to put it in the morgue. Out at the morgue, they had 2 refrigerated body compartments that we used to put them in, and then we would go out and get the bodies from there. But they always brought the airmen to us, but on the dependents and everything, we went out for them. But they weren't cold enough, and it became so offensive. They were afraid they were going to, upset everybody in the hospital. So they later moved them over to a hangar, and that's the last that she knew anything about them too. The lieutenant knew anything about them, but she didn't know how they moved it or anything about it. But they were taken to a hangar because the odor was so offensive they couldn't. That, like they said, it was upsetting everything.
That's great.
So,
Fantastic. Yeah.
Did she ever tell you where she thought or where she was told the bodies went from Roswell?
I'm sorry.
Where the bodies went from Roswell?
Did you know where they were shipped out? Did you know where they went?
She didn't know.
You never,
She never told me. She never mentioned any.
never suggested them.
No suggestion whatsoever. She just said that the last she heard they were in a hangar, and that's all she knows. And we never discussed anything else.
I guess if that takes care of everything, would you like to watch it?
Or just a portion of it, just to get an idea. You don't need to watch the whole.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's turn it around and watch it.
Do you